Great. Good afternoon and welcome to day 2 of the SCORES Poetry Summit, Words in Action. My name is Angela Bailey, coming to you from America SCORES Bay Area, where we partner with over 60 schools in order to provide free soccer, poetry, and service learning, now activism training for our young poet athletes. Across the country, we are in 11 different cities working to provide service for over 12,000 poet athletes. And we call them poet athletes because these youth are learning life skills and learning how to express themselves on the field, off the field, everywhere. That's the point, right? So super excited to welcome everybody here today. On behalf of America SCORES Bay Area, we have such an incredible lineup. Thank you to all of our speakers. A couple quick shout outs. First to Alicia Yano, Tamsin Smith, Dean Rader, and our CEO Colin Schmidt for putting together this stellar lineup of speakers and talented artists. Thank you. And second, also got to give props to Soma Equity Partners and to the SAC Brand Group because they support the cause and they helped us to bring all this talent to our community and share it out today. So thanks everyone. Before I go and turn it over to Hamza, I'm going to leave you with a poem written by one of our young poet athletes in the Bay. Her name is Gabby from Venetia Valley Elementary, and the title of her poem is Community. I am a superhero who fights to be brave and cleans the world. My superpower is time. I will use my superpower to clean the community, to be clean. Sometimes it's not easy to do something hard. I show that I am brave when I talk. I will change the world by cleaning. I will make my voice heard. And I will say, when you see something on the ground, you can pick it up. I will lift up my community when I clean the world. I will do whatever I need to do for the world. Right on, Gabby. Thank you very much for joining us. Yep, thanks to Gabby. Hamza, my esteemed colleague, it's all you.
Thank you very much, Angela. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hamza Al-Haidari. I'm with America SCORES Bay Area, and I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this session with the beautiful folks we have here on the panel. First of all, I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us and all our speakers for being here. I do not want to do a disservice to your resumes and your history, so I'd love to leave most of the introduction to you. But with us, we have Mike Taylor and Patrick from, sorry, not SPARC, Bay Area. You're on mute.
Right.
Bay Area Creative.
Bay Area Creative is our organization. SPARC Poetry is the flagship program bringing poetry education in schools.
Beautiful. And we have Gabriel from Youth Speaks. Welcome, Gabriel. Thanks for joining us. And we have Leah Morales from America SCORES Bay Area. Let's go ahead and get started with some minor introduction or some introductions from all of you. We have a lot of folks on the panel, so we'll try and manage the time as best as we can. Leah, can we please start with you if you want to introduce us to yourself and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Alicia and Hamza and everybody for putting this together. It's really, really amazing. My name is Leah Morales. I have been working at SCORES since 2014, so about almost 7 years now. And I'm the program director in Oakland and in San Rafael. And for those who are unfamiliar, I'll just give a really brief version because I feel like we just talked about America SCORES a little bit. But yeah, we do soccer and poetry and service learning and after school programs for 1st to 8th graders, mostly 3rd to 5th graders. And that's me.
Thank you, Leah. Let's move the mic to Gabriel. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be in the space. We're just doing quick introductions of ourselves. Is that right? Right on.
Yes, please. A little introduction about who you are and the organization you work for, please.
Yeah. So Gabriel Cortez, Director of Programs at Youth Speaks, which has been around in the Bay Area and doing things throughout the world since 1996. So we're celebrating 25 years this year. And I've been on staff officially since 2014. So I'm celebrating about 7 years on the team. But first came in contact with Youth Speaks as the youth participant at Brave New Voices, our International Youth Poetry Slam Festival back in 2008. So happy to represent and get to build with y'all.
That's awesome. It's always so wonderful when someone goes through the program and all of the different elements of it. Very nice to have you. Mike and Patrick, would you like to take it away, please?
Yeah, definitely. I'm the co-founder of SPARC Poetry, and SPARC Poetry goes in schools everywhere from kindergarten to high schools to bring poetry, spoken word into those classrooms. And it's kind of divided into three parts of writing techniques and literary devices, stage performance, and lately a lot of screen performances. And then finally, social activism and looking at the world outside of our homes and communities, and seeing how our voice affects that world.
Thank you very much, Mike. Let's move it to Patrick, please.
Yeah. So Mike and I run Bay Area Creative together, which houses the SPARC Poetry Program. In addition to SPARC, Bay Area Creative provides the revisions program that does therapeutic arts work with students in juvenile hall, families in abuse shelters. We've done work with families not in abuse situations as well, just for family bonding work. We've done work in senior communities, connecting seniors with high school students that we work with also through our programs. Through kind of taking SPARC into Bay Area Creative, we broadened the range of ages. SPARC used to work primarily with fifth graders, and then we said, hey, let's work with kindergartners through high school students. So now we teach kindergarten through high school spoken word poetry. Myself got my start at the Berkeley Poetry Slam, which is very much central slam in the Bay that's been going on since the late 90s as well. And you know, I just found this art form to be so impactful and transformative, and the poets in the community were just like everything that I could have dreamt about as far as an artist community to be part of. And so then, you know, created the nonprofit to put our work out there into the world more so. Beautiful.
Thank you very much for joining us. Wow, a lot of rich minds, a lot of rich, definitely a rich subject to talk about in a little bit of time. So let's just dive right into it. What do you say? Awesome. So I want to start with a simple question, but I'd love to get a little bit of a personal answer to it, which is why poetry? Why spoken word? I know for personal reasons myself, I found healing in it. I found self-expression in it, and I learned how to communicate with myself through it. But for you, what is it that drives you to do this? And what is it that drives others to join you in writing and do the workshops that you offer? And we'll start with Gabriel, please.
Oh, yay. I love talking about poetry. So why poetry? Why spoken word? For me, I remember I was 14, 15 years old. And before I was into poetry, I was into hip hop, which was my first love language, I think. And yeah, I remember gathering with the homies, trying to have freestyle ciphers, trying to beatbox in my high school. And then a couple really cool teachers. I started a club called the Hip Hop and Poetry Club. And I remember my big homie, David, AKA Pigeon, shout out to you if you ever get to see this. He was like, hey, we should come through. And so we went, and that's, I think, really one of the first times that, you know, within that space, we were looking at bootlegs of deaf poetry on YouTube. And I was like, oh, cool, this is kind of hot. You know, like I don't have to be on beat. Yeah, I'm kind of feeling this. So my own kind of writing started to drift from really, really bad raps to really, really bad poems, love poems, like, and, you know, just like angsty, trying to, I think for me, trying to find ways of articulating and just like getting it right, you know, just trying to put it, so, you know, putting it down on the page was and sharing it aloud was just a way of, I think, figuring out my own voice. And as it relates to, you know, our young folks now, like, you know, poetry, spoken word, you know, whatever kind of the vessel or the medium is just for us to really kind of get to that thing of, you know, what's your story? What do you have to say? And I think poetry, spoken word is a handy vessel because there's minimal barriers to entry. It doesn't require much technology, Just need a pen and a pad, and maybe not even that. Plenty of young folks just go off the top of the dome because they're like, oh yeah, this must be what you do. So it's accessible and not really concerned with grammar or spelling. It's just like say it like you think it. Put it down on the page like they speak it in your neighborhood. And in that way, I think is just kind of democratizing. Yeah, just beginning with your voice and however it manifests.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Patrick, I'd like to move on to you and then get your perspective on this, please.
Yeah, definitely. Hold on. Let's close that door. So, I just found art. I grew up in a community of artists down in an art festival in Southern California that my mom and my friend's parents were all, made their living selling their art. And just, I think I was raised around this creative energy and what it's like to be around people who've pledged themselves to this creative energy. And at one point in time, I was kind of traveling the world and I hadn't really self-identified as an artist yet. But I was, definitely like immersed in creativity. And at that point, I was freestyling poems just off the top of my head in bad Jim Morrison style. I was very into the 60s movement. And I was playing with this jazz musician at this club. And I was sitting in with him on the regular. This is in Thailand, actually, where I was traveling kind of as a nomad for a while. And so I was performing with dude, and he was like, man, you got some chops. You're really like coming up with that on the dome. And I was like, yeah, I just feel your improvisational energy, and then words come based on what you're improvising. And, and he's like, I feel that. He was like, well, all right. He's like, I got this big show. That's why I'm at this island doing this big show with like 300 people. I would like you to join me for a couple songs. And he called me up to stage, and there's this huge venue out in the jungle. Everyone's dancing, having an amazing time. And he's like, all right, I want to call this poet up who does this thing where he just freestyles the poem based on what we're playing, and they have him up the stage. And I just backed off to the back of the venue. And I was like, nope, not doing that. Terrifying. Everyone's dancing, having a great time. They don't want to hear my poem. They don't want to hear poetry. I'm making up top of my head with this amazing jazz cat playing. So at the end of the show, I come out to congratulate him on his amazing show and put my hand out, shake his hand, give him a fist bump or whatever. And he looks at my hand, he looks at me, he doesn't touch my hand, and he's like, so why didn't you get up on that stage? And I was like, oh, well, I don't know. People didn't really want to hear it, and it was like, everyone was dancing, having a great time, and he cuts me off. And he looks me in the eyes, squints his eyes, and he says, every time that you don't do what calls to you to be done, you don't answer that calling, you are cheating yourself and everyone who could have bared witness. And then he just leans forward a little more, squints at me a little deeper. And I was like, wow, snap. And then a week later or so, I was sitting in with him at a show again, and he wasn't supposed to be performing that night, but the guy who was doing the show called him up to stage. Then he called me up to stage. And afterwards we're hanging out, and his partner asked him, she was like, what, you said you weren't going to perform tonight. It was just going to be you and me and whoever. I'm not mad at you, but I just want to know why you performed. And he was like, because I am pure creative energy. When that guy called me up to stage, I got to collaborate. That's what creative energy does, is it mixes and collaborates. And I heard that, and I was like, I'm pure creative energy too. Grew up around artists. I'm in. I moved to the Bay Area and committed myself to the poetry slam scene. That's the history.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. I love the animation too. I was there. I was at that. I was in that backstage. Let's move it to Mike, please.
Why poetry? I grew up listening to hip hop. I grew up playing sports. And anyone that knew me, especially back then, would be like, Mike, you are mad competitive. So when I found out about this, like, you can do a competition that's also poetry, and you just write the poem and then perform it on stage, and then there's scores and you can win. As a 15-year-old kid that really only cared about like basketball, and I don't know, maybe like playing Scrabble with my mom, just any game that you could compete against somebody else with, I was down. So because I already loved to write poetry, as soon as I found out about this slam competition scene, I took my poems that I had written and took them on stage. And at first it wasn't about any sort of like activism or telling my story or trying to go into any deep dive of what was happening in like current affairs. I was like, I'm gonna go on stage and make people laugh. I'm gonna go on stage and just connect with everyone in the audience. And I remember being like 15, going to Youth Speaks events, going to events in Makla and San Jose, and just really realizing that it was more than a sport. It was more than going on stage and saying a poem and maybe winning $50 at the Berkeley Slam. It was a community of all sorts of people that were definitely not like me. I met all sorts. I was raised in a very conservative home that had one way of thinking, and when I got to the slam scene, I had to shut up for a while and just listen to people. I had to shut up and listen to people's stories, people's experiences, people's reality that I was so out of touch with. And more than like competition or trying to become a better writer or trying to win a slam, I started to feel accepted and empowered by this community of people that weren't just like surface level, weren't like each other. But we were still like, hey, you talked about this in a poem. How is that going in your life? Like, hey, do you need this thing? Hey, how can I help you? And what I realized is that the relationships that were formed continued off stage. And so it was more than just a stage competition. As I used to do pickup basketball games. I see those people on Saturday mornings. I don't see them ever again. And that was not the case with Poetry Slam.
Thank you very much for sharing. Leia, to you now. Why poetry and spoken word for you personally and for the students you teach?
Yeah, so I just have to say, I'm gonna be honest, when Patrick was squinting his eyes and he was looking at me, I really felt like he was looking at me and calling me out because like, so I came to poetry through my work with scores. Like at heart, I am a soccer player, right? And so when I was asked to be on this panel, I was like, I don't know if this is the right place for me. But you just confirmed it for me. So thank you, Patrick. So why poetry? I mean, for scores and my personal experience with scores can definitely confirm this. It's just like both soccer and poetry are essentially creative self-expression and building community and building and I think that's really what it comes down to for me. I am only a poet in the sense, I consider myself only a poet in the sense that in the classroom, where I try to my best to express myself and share my truth and be vulnerable with my students, and offer them the space to do the same. So I think for scores, it's about the whole thing, the whole child, the physical well-being with soccer, and the giving them the tools, the confidence, the leadership, the ability to use words to shape their world around them. So that's why poetry for me.
Tagging off that, I'm super competitive. I will go in soccer too.
I was just gonna say, Mike, I think if you had a scores program when you were growing up, you'd probably be our star poet athlete. Amazing. So I have a lot of questions to every single one of you, and I want to get to as many of them as I can with the time. I want to jump into the competition aspect of poetry. We've talked about poetry slams, and for us with scores, and Leia will talk more to this, but we've done a lot of contests and showcasing. But what have you done, and how we talk about poetry being a community, being vulnerable, expressing feelings? How do you turn something from that theme that it's in, the frame that it's in, to a competition where you're scoring it and you're competing with others? And we'll start with Mike, please.
So I didn't get into poetry slam thinking I was going to write anything deep or personal or anything. But I've been a poet for, a competing poet for over 15 years now. And there was some turning point where I realized that these stories that I had that have happened in my life, in my experiences, would give something to other people hearing them. So this idea of sharing things about yourself that are either experiences or things that you're learning or struggling with. On the competition side, yeah, there's things that you can do in slam that are going to make you score higher. But you don't want to sacrifice those things that will make you score higher and the judges will like for that truth of your story, and you want to be true to yourself and your experiences and story, because just that in itself is powerful. And you talk to people after the show and they're saying like, hey, they want to share stories of things that happened similarly to them, or they say, hey, I didn't realize that was happening in my community in general. So I guess the things that score high in poetry are things that capture the audience. So aside from your story, aside from your experience and what you want to say, yes, you want to be entertaining on stage. Yes, you want to make the crowd laugh. I actually don't care about judges. I'm just on stage, I'm saying, how can I make it so that the crowd, the audience, is right there with me? Earlier, someone said, Patrick, when you were squinting in your story, I felt like you were squinting at me. The idea is exactly that, where if you're on stage, you want to have the audience right there laughing with you, crying with you, experiencing those, like if you're talking about a poem where talking about your struggles, even if the audience member has not gone through that specific struggle, you want them on that struggle with you through the words that you're saying and how you're describing it. So I'd say that the key to slam is keeping your story true while using these elements of like performance and storytelling that bring people there with you.
Beautiful. Thanks very much. Gabriel, would you like to weigh in? And how do you take poetry from the small little journal that most of us keep to a competition stage?
Yeah. I think this is a topic that, definitely deserves time. I think kind of want to bring us back to even just kind of the roots of Poetry Slam and an acknowledgement that it is, I think that the idea of putting, like scores to poems is itself kind of like an inherent farce and contradiction, for particular ends. Going back to like the first poetry slams, and it's just like, how do we just make an interesting show, that is interesting both for performers and for audience? And just thinking back to like the era of the 80s, right? This is post Beats, like post Black arts movement, where a lot of these folks are now in academia, and it's like the idea that, oh yeah, you need to have a degree, to be a writer, to be a poet. And I think the innovation of, poetry slam or competition in this is like actually putting the scores in the hands of just the people that happen to be in the room, whether this is the first poem you've ever heard in your life, or like, nah, like I study this, and say that each of you has, your hands on the cards, and everyone here could have an opinion on art, or like, did that move me, to whatever, however you kind of measure that. I think as it relates to my work, like it's already coming up. It's just like, yeah, like the competition hooks folks, that maybe, typically, poetry or speaking up or sharing your story, you know, or being vulnerable by itself wouldn't, you know. So our old national director, Hadari Davis, would often say that poetry slam is like Sesame Street for teenagers, just in the sense of like, you've got the little kids who are like, man, I love Elmo, I love Big Bird, you know, and I want to tune in every, you know, Saturday morning or whenever it comes on. And, you know, little do they know that, you know, they're also learning their ABCs, you know, their 1, 2, 3s. And similarly with poetry slam, it's like, man, I came for the competition, right? Like I came to win, right? And little do the teenagers know, you know, and that's the group, you know, Youth Speaks works with, but they're also building community. You know, it's also developing that muscle of expressing self. And I always say, like, it's like, yo, the poems, the words on stage are tight, but it's really about the conversation afterward that now gets opened up, you know, and that step out of isolation, you know, that especially, you know, like our youngsters get kind of socialized into. So in that way, it's like, it's a trick. It's a trick. And I always love that moment where we can pull back the curtain. It's like, aha, you know, when young folks start to move from that role of participant to how do I now hold that space for other folks? You know, how can poetry slam be a helpful or unhelpful tool, you know, towards getting us to that real place, you know, place of honesty. And I think last thing I'd say on this too is, you know, I think it creates an opportunity for a helpful negotiation for the poet of themselves and audience in an interesting way. It's like, okay, you know, how do you get what you need while also, you know, considering, you know, what do the people need to hear right now too, right? Where do the scores fit in all of that? And I think it's just a helpful mechanism for all that.
I love that. I think you said something about there's the performance on stage, but then there's the conversation afterwards, and that's sort of the lasting impression that you probably want to impact with the poem. And with that, I want to twist the question a little bit here for Leah, and ask, how do you, when teaching poetry along with soccer, and you have a soccer team, and it's very easy to identify the team and the team spirit within a soccer team, how do you build that same culture for the poetry class in the poetry classroom and make a poetry team?
Yeah, I'll just say something real quick on the competition piece too, that, you know, as much as we want students and kids and ourselves even to be motivated by the intrinsic values of, you know, like a lot of the driving force behind a lot of what we do as humans and what we're socialized, like you said, Gabe, into is through competition. And I think that what I've seen, you know, from seeing both the San Rafael and the Oakland programs grow from hardly having any schools doing poetry to having a full-fledged, you know, poetry slam competition, is that competitive aspect is really helpful. It makes kids practice, it makes kids show up in a way that maybe they wouldn't have. And I think also transitioning to the other part of the question that you brought up, Hamza, is like, I think one of the biggest lessons that we try to teach, or I think one of the most important lessons that I try to teach students, is around how to win and how to lose. And it can be hard on the soccer field. And you know, it happens every single day in soccer practices, or like this person was lifted up and I wasn't. Like, how do I support that person anyway? We're in a team, but there's going to be individuals. Like, how do we support each other anyway? Whether we win or we lose that time. And what lessons can we learn? Did I miss anything, Hamza?
I think you got it. I mean, we're talking about poetry, so the answers can just flow. Patrick, I want to shift to you a little bit here. You've had your fair share of competition in competing in slams as a poet, but you also, when you started, you're saying these things off your dome, and just you had that experience where you could have spoken to an audience and sort of backed out. For you, how do you take something that you write that's so deep, so personal, that you hope people relate to a point where you're on stage performing turning it to a performance and you're competing with them?
Well, practice, right? Like one of my friends has a poet, old school poet, Abdul, I think is who it is. And he's like, in the poem, he's like, yeah, you see someone walking down the street muttering to himself, they may not be schizophrenic, they may be a spoken word poet practicing their poem, and for the first year or so I was cutting my teeth, I was practicing a poem all the time. Like, you're memorizing that poem, you're running that poem through your head, you're saying it to yourself, you're saying it silently, you're listening to it while you sleep. Everyone has their own method. And you're really embodying the poem, taking it into yourself. And since I grew up in a community of artists who were paying the rent through their art, my mom, my friends' parents, almost all of my friends' parents were making rent at this place called the Sawdust Festival, where I grew up. And they all embodied that art also. One this thing they did at an open mic on the side hobby. They're like, this is my life. I am living and breathing this art form. So to take a piece that is that personal to you and put it onto the stage for a competition or not, but to put it on the stage for your livelihood, right? That's what I really think it's about, right? Slam gives you a way to assess if this is something you want to do or can do for your livelihood, and because you're going to have to put a price tag on any kind of art you're trying to sell. And I know how painstaking that is growing up, watching my friends' parents decide how much do I sell this painting for, or this piece of pottery, or this jewelry for, and in any case, you have to embody the art first. You have to live it. So, you practice that poem in front of the mirror, you practice it with your friends, you practice it in all different states of mind, you practice it walking down the street to school, all these times, you're running this poem constantly through your mind until it becomes a part of you, to where starting the poem and ending the poem are the same one fluid motion. Like if you're playing soccer, you learn all the different steps in a kick, but when you do that kick, you don't think about pulling your foot back and all those things, all comes together in one fluid motion. Right. So when we take our poems to the stage and put it in a competition, it is that same fluid motion. You start that poem and you're just going, you're in it. And it's not like autopilot. It is this beautiful, blissful experience, I find, of just fully being in it, being in that art form, and just diving as deeply as you can into that creativity in that moment. And, that's how you take it to the stage and take it to the competition. And that's why you do it also. I think for me, it was like, I grew up in a community of artists who were paying rent by doing art, And so I knew that at the Slam, my freestyle Jim Morrison off the dome poems weren't scoring that well. And I was like, shit, if I want to be a professional poet, I guess I'm going to have to write them down. Sorry for cursing, write them down and memorize them and do the thing that everyone else is doing. And then I did. And then I was able to tour and travel the world and paid my rent for a couple of years performing poetry, which was really hard. And then we started the nonprofit because it's not quite as hard as being a full-time professional artist.
That's beautiful.
I want to jump in on one of the things you were saying, especially applying to this question. When it's a very personal poem, maybe something that you're struggling with right now or struggled with in the past, sometimes just that act of saying it over and over helps you become stronger around that topic. Those words are powerful, even if they're like coming from yourself. When you're saying that over and over to yourself, it can help you get past those ideas in general, and or maybe not get past them or become comfortable with them yourself. That said, there are some poems that I write that are not for being scored. This poem is mine. It's special. It's to be shared. It's to be performed. But I'm not going to take it to a slam. Not that it wouldn't do well at a slam. It's not for that. It's not for you judges. No, I have particularly my mom passed a few years ago, and I have some poems that are just really close to my heart in that relationship that aren't for slam, even if they're for people to hear and connect with. They're not for the game.
Beautiful. I love the concept of practicing creativity. I really appreciate that. I want to shift to another frame of conversation here and talk a little bit about what you do as an organization and program in the classroom with students. But before we do that, I am very thirsty for poetry, and I'd love to, if you will, share a few lines or a short poem from each of you, if you would like. And I won't call on anyone. Maybe someone would like to volunteer and share a poem first.
I got one. This is a very performative poem that I do for the elementary kids. They love it very much. It's one of the oldest poems I wrote. Funny thing, my friends who were slamming a lot, they're like, oh, it's a cute poem, but it's not going to score well. Turned out the poem scores great, and I love performing it.
How much time to each of us? Because we could make this like a 3-minute, 10-second poem for slam, or we could give you a few lines of something that's like, I just want to know how much time you're thinking of.
Maybe a minute tops.
Perfect, cool. I will cut this one off. It's a 3-minute poem, but I can end it at the minute line. I've done that before. Awesome, here it goes. Blathering blubber tackle. Oh my God, when I was young, about 7 years old, I used to get so excited, it was like having electricity mousetrap itself onto my tongue, firing off overloads of exuberance until nerves clutched muscle, wrapping themselves onto bones like a hurricane was ripping at my flesh. Everything inside me was moving so fast, my mouth didn't trust that it could keep up. It was 2nd grade, and I just looked at her as though her pupils were tunnels and the glow shining out of them were the headlamps of an oncoming semi-truck. I had obviously chased her down on the playground for some reason, but I just stood there and sweated with a heaving chest, not daring to demolish the dear heart of my silence. I was about to be flattened by her big wheel of indifference, turning me into dear street pizza. Well, 1 minute.
That was very nice. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yep.
Anyone else would like to go next?
Share a short little piece.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Yeah. We'll say this is in honor of George Floyd and others, harmed by state violence. 6:30 a.m. The sun stretches its fingers across every broken window. Ha! Remix! This is new. This is how you know. The sun stretches its fingers through every window, broken and unbroken alike. There lies a parable about equality. There lays a child murdered in the streets of You Pick the City. In the bathroom mirror, I practice adhering a face back together. Soon, I will decide what shirt to wear to my mugshot, the logistics of milk and spray, how best to layer a spine for beating. What defense is bicycle helmet from nightstick, respirator for an arm-choked esophagus. The jaw envies the stainless steel thermos, how it reservoirs water, how it furnaces heat, how it opens glass with its whole body committed through the frame. I lace my kicks for arson, swim goggle for gas, oven mitt for smoke. I fly my hair loose and coiling, a flag intent on burning. If anger is the blood moon rising to my throat, what of the man who will arrest me, the star mocking his chest? Does he also slide his uniform over his knees, one leg at a time? Imagine how stiff a neck grows before breaking.
Very powerful. Thank you for sharing. Mike or Leia? You're competing for a 3rd turn right now. Does that trigger something?
Leia, would you like to go first?
You want me to go? I'm gonna read in honor of this being team poetry and all. I chose a poem written by International Community School and Think College Now students. This is their team poem that they created this last year. It's called What We Are. Our differences are important because we are unique. I am unique because I am double jointed. I'm unique because I have dimples. I'm good at editing pictures. I'm good at Minecraft. I am good at playing ball. I am good at video games. We are proud of being Black, Mexican, and Filipino. When we help others, we feel happy, calm, and amazing. When someone helps us, we feel thankful and grateful. We are strong when we don't give up and work hard. Our community is strong when we work together. Together, we can build a strong community. We are proud of being diverse. We are cast 5th grade.
Thank you very much, Leia, for sharing that poem.
Thanks. I guess I'm last. It took me a little bit to find it because I was like, I should find the poem I was talking about that's not really for slam. So I did find it.
Beautiful.
This poem's for my mom. We're playing Scrabble. It's my turn. My mom looks at the clock and asks if I'm waiting for Christmas. See, the only traditions we had growing up were board games and talking trash. Mom taught me how to love the English language. The smooth wooden tiles were currency. Mom spelled out work and hard with the same R. Connected solve across the end of problems taught me there were enough letters to transpose the right words for every moment, to plan 2 turns ahead and always make a move no matter how many vowels end up in your rack. One day, she spelled out joint pains. She connected that to stage 4 lymphoma, a double word connected to hospital rooms, across chemo, across nausea, looked at her tiles and realized there was not much left she could do. But the only traditions we have are playing board games and talking trash. So she announces, she's about to beat me like I was her stepson. The doctors have given her until September. She looks at the clock and she asks if I'm waiting for Christmas. She's laughing, says after this game, I'm gonna be in the hospital bed looking more tore up than she does. Trades in her rack for alternative treatment. The chemotherapy has destroyed her white blood cells and she's not able to try any new programs, but she still keeps playing 2 turns ahead, connecting the nurses to church services this weekend. Helps Jordan with her homework, lets Shari and the girls stay in the spare room, gets Evan a piano lesson every week, tells him to practice Beethoven's Fur-Elise until this hospital room turns into a concert hall. Last week, she wrote a letter to my future wife, tells me the wedding gift is on her shelf in the closet, apologizes she won't get to meet her. There's a board full of wooden tiles and stories and laughter, and it's her last night, and she tells me, it's your move. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing that. All right. That's what the magic of poetry, the magic of poetry. Thank you all for sharing these poems. Really appreciate it. I'm going to turn the page here to a different, a little bit of conversation here about your program and how you enable students to write. It's it's not a new idea to any of us that having a blank page in front of you to write is very intimidating and difficult, especially if you're a young student without much experience in this. What are some of the ways that you use to get students to write and share their ideas and thoughts and express themselves out there? And would love to start with Leah.
Sure, yeah. I think one of the, we work in schools with lots of students. A lot of our students are newcomers. A lot of the students we work with, which means that they may or may not be, a grade level in reading and writing English, or even speaking. And one of the things that helps our students get going is little sentence starters. Definitely that's really, really helpful, especially for, 1st through 5th grade, is really, really helpful. A lot of times we'll do team poetry at the beginning to get, them starting to feel comfortable sharing their words. That's another way. Those are the 2 main ways that I can think of right now. I'll drop in the chat if I think of anything else.
Thanks very much, Leah. Let's go to Patrick. What are some of your techniques and ways to work with students? And for you, you said you work with some incarcerated population as well, or juvenile hall?
Yeah, we work with youth in juvenile hall. So it's different in every situation. Every classroom is different. It's different culture in every room. And ages are also very different. I was teaching kindergarten for the first time, poetry, 3 years ago. And I performed that poem about me as the spastic little kid. And right afterwards, kindergartner, she was like, can I do one? And I was like, yeah, go for it. And so she does a poem, then it kind of made sense. And I was like, wow. And then I was like, does anyone else want to go? And I hadn't taught them anything. We hadn't done nothing besides me performing a poem. And then before I know it, every kid is like, yeah, I'll do one. And they're kind of making up a story on the spot. They're being creative. I just think that, like, yeah, blank page can be intimidating, but also I do believe we are pure creative energy. That's what we are. And that we have all these barriers and blocks, these voices that say I'm not good enough and I can't do it. And what if people don't like it? And what if people judge me? And when you work with the kindergartners, they don't have those voices. If you tell them like, oh, there's a technique you got to do right to do the thing, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I got to do the thing. But if you're like, hey, be creative, they're like, I got you. I got the creativity, You're working with students in juvenile hall, totally different. There, I walk in with a lesson plan and I know right away that lesson plan ain't mattering. And I was like, what is everyone doing here? Everyone's telling stories. We're not doing poetry, we're doing storytelling, because you all are already doing storytelling. That's what you do here, is you tell a bunch of stories all the time, pass the time. So I'll tell you some stories and then you all can tell some stories. And I'll try and, map out some of the techniques you're using that you don't even know you're using, that everyone uses when they tell stories. So I think a lot of it is that we have these innate abilities to tell stories. Spoken word is one of the oldest art forms that exists, like storytelling is the oldest art form that exists. Then you got the griots in Africa and the bards in Europe and people all over the world who were taking these stories and turning them to more lyrical things that were more like spoken word poems that we have today. So I truly believe that it is in our DNA to do this art form. And that really, you want to give people some tools and give them some methods to do it with, and then let them know, like, you can use this tool or not. And if you're going to use a metaphor, here's the way to do it. And we worked on metaphors today, but you want to write a whole poem with no metaphors, that's fine. When they're fifth graders, we're like, no, you should try and use the tools, the tricks we're teaching you, but really when it comes down to it, the idea is if you want to be creative, you will be creative. And I think in this world where we're forced to do so much, and we have so much colonialism, and we have so much people being forced off of their land and forced to act a different way and forced to sound like the dominant culture and all of these things. And I think creativity is, at its essence, an unforceable act, that you cannot force anyone to be creative. It is 100% the most pure act of free will that we can do. So as a poetry teacher, I like to create that free will space and to be like, yo, I'm going to be up here freed up, having fun, letting curse words fly. If I'm teaching in high school, you can write curse words in your poems if it's in high school. We don't let them curse at the kindergarten level or anywhere else. But it's that whole like freed up space. Radical free speech is what spoken slam is all about, and spoken word's all about, right? And that's what we all want. We're censored so often, and I think letting people know, like, you can't censor your soul. You cannot censor what it is you have to say. And here's a place to let that out. You got something to let out on the page, let it out on the page. And then we teach them some tricks that are very intuitive. Mike is a genius, I think, at creating these very intuitive tricks, techniques that are super easy to grasp, yet a very complex thing to do. So I've taken a lot of what Mike has taught and run with that in my own way.
I would love to pass the mic along to Mike and learn about techniques. Go ahead, Mike, please.
In especially the third grade to middle school setting, so maybe third to eighth grade. And I'm realizing a lot of people watching this, either now or later on, might be like, I want a specific thing that I can do with my students.
After.
And having that specific thing you can do with your students to teach them something poetry. Growing up, my mom made literally everything into a game. You're not letting me plug your seatbelt in, and you're taking too long to do it in yourself. We're going to create this game, the seatbelt race. I need to teach a kid alliteration. All right, everybody is going to say a word with the same starting sound. If you take too long, you're out. If you say a word that doesn't alliterate, thank you for playing, but you're out. If you say or something like that, you're also out. And we'll be playing these alliteration games in class, or rhyme games in class, or metaphor games in class, which are all a different version of stand in a line and we're going to do the trick as fast as we can. So if I was going to play with Leah, Patrick, Hamza, Gabriel, and we're going to play an alliteration game, let's go in that order to Leah, Patrick, Hamza, Gabriel. I can say words with the same starting sound, like fire, from, fair, follow. Leah, do you have another one?
Fall.
Fall.
Fish.
Hamza?
Forward.
Art.
And we would keep doing this in an elementary school classroom as fast as we could in a row. And they're all like students that are not playing the game at the same time are in the back shouting out letters. And I'm like, dead word, if you say that word, you're out now. And we're having a great time. And they're not worried about what literary device am I learning. They're worried about, can I think of another word really fast so I can stay in the game? That also has to deal with a little bit more about getting them used to winning sometimes and losing sometimes. But they're learning these literary devices while thinking about, how can I play this game? How can I play that game?
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you very much for sharing that. Gabriel?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about, actually, because like writing workshops are like just kind of a love language for me at this point. I do them with my family, with my little brother, with my mom. We're just like, let's just gather around the table and just make kind of a little sacred space for us to maybe say things that we don't typically get to say in conversation. I think there's already been so much wisdom set and kind of shared in the space. This particular art form of ours, just performance poetry, spoken aloud. I think one of our superpowers as facilitators, as folks that practice it, is to, share the first poem in the space. It's one of my favorite ways to introduce himself, and also modeling what this thing is, and putting some skin on the game. It's like, if we're gonna come into the space, especially working with young folks, like, who are you? First of all, and like, why should I care? And I often find that like that breaks the ice, and then I can get out of the way for the workshop, to really happen. And just the founder of Youth Speaks, James Kaz would often say that our workshops are places where writing happens, but it's not the only thing that happens. It might be an hour-long session, but maybe we're writing for like 7 minutes, because throughout the rest of the time we're doing a check-in. Maybe that takes 15 minutes just to get around the circle, just how are you? Maybe even put a creative spin on it, like what's a plant that best represents how you feel? What's your kind of flavor of the week, and just, to break the ice. And then we start to transfer that on over to a word palette. So when we're able to gather in person, we'll have a big whiteboard, that's blank at first, but then we start to fill it in, through conversation, asking a question like, when I say the word love, what are words that come to mind? And we start to fill it up with all the cliche, all the butterflies, all the, maybe even the not cliche stuff, like, oh, actually, let's talk about non-romantic love. And, it just spirals in the conversation. It simultaneously becomes the place where we're tracking the conversation. And it's also the first poem that we write together. Because then you read back the board and it starts to sound really fly. And folks are like, okay, what, I did that? Bet. And then we start to, tackle our own pages. So if the word palette prompt was love, we give folks maybe 5-7 minutes to just do a free write, however it comes to your mind, however your language manifests, just whatever you do, don't stop writing, right? And the challenge is, if we're talking about love, tell me about love, but you are not allowed to use any of the words on the board, and now we start to get into some original stuff, right? Like, oh, word, you can use synonyms perhaps, or maybe we're talking about like, if the previous conversation was like things we hope don't come back, when the pandemic is over, when we're finally able to gather in place, we're talking about police violence, we're talking about climate change, we're talking about da-da-da-da. Now the poem, the prompt is to, tell me about what it would be like to walk into a museum where that thing is just the only way we know it is like, because it's behind the glass, after a poem by like Franny Choi or something. But yeah, and so folks get to write, and then the most important part, I'd say, is when folks get to share, because that's when it gets contagious. That brave step, again, out of isolation, into that small stage of just the circle of like, hey, I wrote this. We all just wrote this newborn poem that is less than 10 minutes year old, 10 minutes years old, 10 seconds, 10 minutes old, and we're gonna love up on it, when we share it. And yeah, that's when it really starts to happen, where, oh, word, Gabe shared, but now, the homie, across the table sharing, and it changes a thing, both for the room and when folks start to hear themselves in that way. And yeah. But I'm leading a workshop actually on Friday, which I encourage y'all to come on through to as part of this awesome Scores Poetry Summit. It's going to be 8:30 a.m. Pacific time, and it's called Practicing Liberation, Leading Writing and Performance Workshops for Teens. So if you're interested and you should come on through because you'll get to experience it. Then we'll break it down.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing. And Mike, I think you and I have a shared love language, which is a really great taqueria. That is absolutely my love language. I want to move on with the question to Leah. Leah, what are some of the techniques and practices that you use with your students to get them to write poetry?
I think I might have already gone, but I'll try to elaborate.
If you have, I apologize. I may have lost track. Did you all go with that question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, you went first. Sorry, I apologize.
No worries.
Perfect. Well, that gives me a little more time here then. I want to ask one last question here, and particularly, what tips and advice do you have for educators who want to engage students in poetry and spoken word? And would love to start with Patrick.
Yeah. I mean, I think, my belief is that, if you want to teach art and creativity and the passion it takes to do it and the commitment it takes to do it, you better invite an artist into your room to do it. That's 100%. If you're trying to teach soccer to someone, you better have committed yourself to soccer and to know what that feels like and to know exactly why you're playing and not just how to do a kick and not what the techniques are, but how it can change you and transform you and all of those things. And so often art is taught not that way, where the teacher looks through a textbook or they buy some worksheets online or whatever. And then like, now we're doing painting and the teacher doesn't paint for fun. They don't know anything about painting and how that transforms you as a person and, all those things, right? And to me, art is, it is the essence of this core of who we are, this creative essence that I think we really are all the time. We're being creative all the time. Every time we make a choice of what we're wearing today, how we're going to do our hair, all those things are creative choices, and we are choice makers and we are creative beings. And if you want someone to come in there to hold that space for the students and to really go in there, you want to pick someone who has themselves pledged themselves towards that creativity. So that's my advice, to be purely simple and honest, is to invite a poet into your class, have them teach a workshop.
That is a great advice. Thank you very much. Leah?
Yeah, for me, as not a poet who teaches poetry, I think the most important thing, and I think that there are people that, I think the most important thing is creating community, creating a safe space, and making sure the students are having fun. Like, if the student, no matter if you're teaching, for me, if I'm teaching soccer and the students aren't having fun, no matter how good of a good soccer teacher I am, no matter how good that student is at soccer, if I'm not creating a fun space or a space with community, that student's not coming back. Doesn't matter how good they are, right? So for me, and like we've talked about so much already on this panel, like it's not even so much about if the words are going to win the poetry slam. It's about the conversations afterwards and the community that we build there. So for me, the most important thing is like, do you love those kids? Like, do you know how to have fun and engage kids? Like, that's, for me, that's the biggest thing.
Thanks very much, Leah. Absolutely, building the community is a key aspect to success with whatever it is, whether it's art, sports, or science. Gabriel, we'll go to you. What advice do you have for educators who want to engage students in poetry and spoken word?
Yeah, totally agreeing with what Patrick and Leah said already. Especially in this moment where we're just like super connected, like what a great time to bring an artist, into the space where we're accessible, y'all. It doesn't take much. And similarly, I would encourage, educators to, like, if you want to hold space, make sure that space is being held for you, so like, yeah, what a great opportunity to get to participate in some workshops as a participant and then get to like, okay, word, maybe I want to bring that to my classroom. That's what we do with our young folks whenever they're starting to transition into the role of facilitator. It's like, first, like, this deeply as a participant, and then, it just makes it that much easier when they're the person you kind of lead in the circle. I think other than that, like, if I could go back to kind of like my educators when it came to like, it's the poetry unit, I think it would come from this traditional notion of like, these are the poets you need to know. And one thing I'm deeply appreciative of, I think Youth Speaks' contribution and just, poetry slam and spoken word in general is this idea that no, your life, your story can come first and should come first. Then when we get into the archive of the poets you need to know, like it is first, it's about, so what does this have to do with me? Like that kind of like reorientation, like your life is the primary text. And now Langston Hughes matters because it's like, oh, I got, like what was young Langston doing 100 years ago? Kind of what game can he put me on in terms of developing my own skills to better tell my story, right? There'd be poetry units where I would maybe never write a poem, or it would never be about passing me the mic, just be about memorizing Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman's fly, but, it's even flyer, when you kind of, you begin with your story.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing. Mike, what's your advice for educators who want to engage students with poetry and spoken word?
Patrick took mine right away, of bring a poet into your classroom. But if I had to give another piece of advice, it would be to try and engage students with what they are excited about, with what's going on with them. Because as soon as you're, we figured out in 5th grade, people love to like play games at recess and they're just doing all these games at recess. So our way of engaging 5th graders is taking like, when the recess bell rings, we don't stop the game and play mentality around that. That strategy does not work in high schools. Hey, who wants to play a game? And they're
like, what do you think we are, elementary school?
Oh, actually, unless we say, you know what, I'm not gonna play games because you guys are in high school and you guys don't like playing games anymore. And then it's just like, wait, hold on, we have an opportunity to play a game. Wait, what's that about? No, the idea is finding out, having these conversations to find out the things that they're into. And then just opening the floor for them to either talk about those things and then hopefully write about those things. A lot of times in poetry classes, there'll be a lot of amazing conversations that happen where students are put in a position where they have to like challenge themselves on what they think about something. And as long as they're doing that, even if a single poem is not written, they've walked away feeling validated because they were in a space where they could express their ideas and have other people listen to those ideas. And then they can further those conversations with their friends or at home or wherever else those conversations take place. Poetry is great to write down, but it's also like a great mindset to have, and exploring new ideas is a great mindset to live with.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing that. Well, we're past our hour mark here, and unfortunately this session has to come to an end. It was an absolute thrill and a privilege to share the space with all of you and be able to chat with all of you. Thank you so much for being here, for joining us. And I want to thank all of our attendees for being part of this session as well. Before we wrap up, does any of you have a burning desire to share a poem to close this talk off? I see some thoughts spinning in your heads. All right.
We could freestyle a poem together, perhaps, or something like that. Might be.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Do we feel up to it?
Let's pick like a repetition line we can all go off of.
And usually also we take three random words to try and also work them into the poem.
Just 4, so let's get four random words.
4 random words. People put 4 random words into the chat, and then we'll take and then whoever starts it off will use some word in that first line as a repetition line.
I would love to invite Michelle, Sarah, Marianne, and Kevin, who are listening to this as well, to partake in this if they'd like.
Cool. We got castle. We need 2 more words. We got castle. We need 2 more words.
Let's get 4. That way we can all. Are we doing this like word of the day or word to?
I mean, yeah, whatever. You know, try and get one of those 4 words into your line. We'll try and make all.
Just get one. Leave some for everybody else. We got castle. We need 3 more words.
2 more words. 2 more words. Someone else. One of the participants. You guys got it. Trophies. Nice. 2 more. 2 more. 2 more. Inspiration. Awesome. Castle, trophies, inspiration. 1 more word. Hamza, why don't you put a word in there? You're moderating this thing.
Okay. Let's go with freedom.
Freedom. Okay. Cool. All right. I'll start it off. If no one else wants to start it off, and then I guess we'll just go popcorn after that. Should I popcorn? I'll pick someone, and then they go next, and we'll popcorn it around. That way otherwise we're waiting for someone to talk forever. All right. I'll go first. Let's see. The greatest trophy any of us will ever have is when we decided, yes, I'm going to answer what has been calling me to do all along. Popcorn, Gabe.
And all along, I was a castle chilling before my own moat. Hope, a river spiked with the bodies of past selves. Hamza, freedom.
Woo. Responsibility is just a word. And some words can just wait out there while I continue to live in freedom and let my heart sing its song. Popcorn. Inspiration to Leia.
This has been such an inspiration to listen to all of you amazing poets. We need another word to pass to Mike. Legacy.
I'll take it here in a whirlwind, in a cyclone of different ideas, different opportunities, all crossing at an intersection of hope and inspiration. It's nice to have the freedom of thought to rock back and forth between my train of thought and other hard places. But in these spaces, we make stages for students and teachers to cross the line of the road or whatever path, maybe it's an ocean current, to grab another trophy, to maybe walk up slowly to the next point that we're really trying to achieve. And maybe I have to stop like we playing freeze tag and I can still rock to the next breeze, pass it over back to Gabriel.
Awesome. I think we'll do a wrap here. That was amazing. Thank you very much for sharing, and thank you for inspiring us to share as well. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, attendees, for being part of this. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening and continue to write on.
Okay. Thank you all for having us.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Scores. You guys are lovely.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. Thank you, Leia. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, I'm glad you're in the classroom. Don't get me wrong. I'm like, bring a poet in there. I'm like, Leia, so valuable that you're in there. Also, I was like,
Leia, you did bring us in there. You literally brought us in there.
Yeah, you guys then brought us in there. Okay.
I'm so glad
Leia's ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's all good. But I totally hear what you mean. I know what you mean, but I know that there's also like, we have parents teaching soccer, you know, and the lessons that we hope to convey in soccer. It's like, it's not so much about the technique, more than like, yeah, like I said, how to win and lose, who's gonna be supporting each other. So that's all I meant.
The community part, I do think that is what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to co-sign that too. I think I'm deeply interested in like how to make it so this work is just this English class. You know, like it's just everyone's doing it. It's of course, you know. And then what can we bring the artists into to help take it to the next level? But I'm like, I think this thing we're talking about, young people's and their voices, like can be deeply democratized. And like Leah said, love the kids, yo. If you're not doing that, why are we talking poetry? You know?
Man, yeah.
Mhm.
Right on. Well, thank you all again. That was lovely. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Do it again
Have a
sometime.
great evening.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having a poetry summit.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.